It was supposed to be a quick interview, just a 10-minute segment on judicial responsibility and congressional oversight. The producers of the nationally syndicated show Justice Roundtable with Judge Judy had invited Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett to speak as a rising voice in progressive lawmaking. But the moment Crockett entered the studio, tension crackled in the air like static. Judge Judy, known for her razor-sharp tongue and zero-tolerance attitude, wasted no time. She greeted Crockett with a stiff nod, barely concealing her disapproval. The cameras rolled. "Congresswoman," Judy said, narrowing her eyes, "before we begin, I suggest you come prepared with facts, not flash. We don't tolerate empty theatrics here." Jasmine didn't flinch. She offered a polite smile and replied coolly, "Judge, if you're looking for drama, maybe you should look in the mirror. I came with receipts." The studio went quiet. The first verbal jab had landed. Judy leaned forward, her voice sharpening. "You think you can out-talk me? I've dealt with smarter people than you before you were even out of law school." Jasmine blinked slowly. "I don't need to out-talk you, Judge. I just need to outlast the noise." The Globe didn't know it yet, but it was about to witness a showdown no one could have scripted. The tension was now fully visible, even the camera operators shifted uncomfortably behind their lenses. Judge Judy's expression hardened. She tapped the table twice, signaling her trademark courtroom dominance. "Young lady," Judy snapped, "let me be very clear. I've spent decades upholding the law. What exactly have you done besides throwing Twitter tantrums and shouting over people in hearings?" There were audible gasps from the production crew. But Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She crossed her legs, rested her hands on the table, and spoke with icy precision. "I've written legislation that's kept food on the tables of working-class families. I've stood between corporate lobbyists and the rights of everyday Americans. And unlike some people," she said, her gaze steady, "I didn't build a career by yelling over vulnerable people on daytime TV." A long pause. Judge Judy clenched her jaw. "Watch yourself, Congresswoman." Crockett leaned in ever so slightly. "I am watching myself. That's why I didn't come here to be lectured by a celebrity judge playing courtroom for ratings." The control room scrambled. The producer whispered frantically into Judy's earpiece, "We're live across 5 countries, cut if it escalates." But Judy wasn't backing down. Neither was Crockett. And what happened next would make headlines in every major outlet within the hour. Judge Judy's lips parted in disbelief. Never, not in over 2 decades of courtroom television, had someone dared to match her tone, point for point. But here was Jasmine Crockett, unshaken, unafraid, and unbothered by the cameras. "You've got nerve," Judy finally muttered. "You sit in Congress for 5 minutes and think you're qualified to tell me how justice works." Jasmine's response was quiet, too quiet. "I've watched people weaponize justice for ratings, for clout, for personal gain. You've been doing it so long, you forgot what real justice looks like." Judy slammed her hand on the desk. "Excuse me." But Crockett didn't flinch. She reached into her folder and pulled out a transcript from a recent congressional hearing. "Let me remind you what I actually do. This is the record from a session where I questioned federal contractors feeding at the taxpayer trough. I wasn't shouting for show. I was fighting for people you'll never meet, people who don't get a camera when their lives fall apart." The document dropped onto the desk with a dull thud. Judy's eyes scanned the top page. Her mouth twitched, as if wrestling with something she didn't want to admit. "Facts over flash," Jasmine said calmly, echoing Judy's own words from earlier. "Remember?" The studio was dead silent. One assistant slowly mouthed, "Oh my God." On social media, the clip had already hit 1 million views. But in that moment, in that room, it felt like time had frozen. And Judge Judy, for the first time in years, had nothing to say. For several seconds, all Judge Judy could do was stare at the transcript, her fingers tapping restlessly against the desk. She wasn't used to being challenged, not like this. Not by someone younger, sharper, and utterly immune to her intimidation tactics. Then she leaned back in her chair and let out a short, bitter laugh. "You've got a mouth on you, Crockett. But let me give you some free advice, from one woman-in-law to another. Pride doesn't win arguments. Discipline does." Jasmine didn't blink. "Discipline is knowing when to speak and when to listen. Something I think your producers wish you practiced a little more." The entire room froze again. Judy's eyes narrowed. "You're pushing it. And you've already pushed too far," Jasmine replied coolly, pulling out her phone and scrolling. "Here's a quote from one of your past rulings: emotions cloud judgment. Facts cut through the noise." She held the screen up. "I'm just applying your own wisdom. If that bothers you, maybe it's because it stopped being about truth for you a long time ago." Judy stood up. "That wasn't in the script. I don't know who you think you're impressing, but you don't come into my house and try to outshine me." Jasmine rose, too. Calm. Poised. Ice in her veins. "I didn't come to impress anyone," she said. "I came because you invited me. And if this is your house, maybe it's time someone checked the foundation." The audience gasped. The sound technician forgot to mute his own shocked "phew." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was historic. The confrontation was no longer just a heated exchange, it was a generational reckoning playing out in real time. Viewers across time zones were glued to their screens, and within minutes, hashtags like #Judy vs. Crockett and #Ice in the Capitol were trending worldwide. Back in the studio, the crew stood frozen. Even Judge Judy's longtime bailiff, normally stone-faced and unreadable, looked rattled. Producers scrambled behind the scenes. One whispered, "Do we cut? Or let it roll?" Another replied, "This isn't a segment anymore. This is history." Judge Judy's voice lowered, tight and deliberate. "You think you're making a name for yourself right now. But what you're really doing is showing the world how arrogance blinds people." Crockett's response came cold and clean. "No, Judge. I'm showing the world that accountability doesn't bow to legacy. Even yours." For the first time ever on the show, Judy's hands trembled slightly. She reached for her water, but it was more for control than thirst. "You may have the spotlight now, Congresswoman," Judy muttered, "but don't confuse viral fame with impact." Jasmine took a step forward, not physically, but with sheer presence. "Impact," she said, "isn't about volume or ratings. It's about what echoes after the lights go off. And trust me, people will remember what happened here a lot longer than they'll remember one-liners and gavels." Across the world, clips flooded TikTok, YouTube, and late-night talk shows. International journalists called it a masterclass in composure versus control. Political analysts were stunned. Judge Judy, the queen of courtroom TV, had just been checked by a rising congresswoman, and the globe had witnessed every second. As the segment ended, the studio lights dimmed, but the tension didn't. The producers moved quickly, trying to regain control of the shaken set. One shouted, "That's a wrap." While another whispered frantically into a headset, "We need PR now, this is already hitting the international wires." Judge Judy remained standing, visibly rattled but trying to maintain her posture. She shot Jasmine a final glance, as if still trying to decide whether to scold her or simply absorb what had just happened. Crockett calmly gathered her papers. No apology. No retreat. A junior producer, barely out of college, nervously approached Jasmine. Congresswoman Crockett. That was. I mean, I've never seen anything like that." Jasmine smiled politely. "I have. It just rarely gets broadcast." She turned and headed toward the exit. As she passed the hallway, a sound technician stopped her. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you just walked into a lion's den, and made the lion blink." Jasmine paused. "Sometimes the lion's roar is just a cover for fear," she replied. You learn to recognize it when you spend enough time in real hearings, not reality shows. Meanwhile, inside the studio, Judge Judy sat back down slowly. She looked toward the control room, her face unreadable. She's good, Judy finally muttered. Too good. A pause. Get me the raw footage. Elsewhere, the internet was erupting. Clips were being translated into multiple languages. Commentary channels dubbed the moment the takedown of the decade. But Crockett? She didn't stay to bask in it. She had a flight to catch and a bill to finish drafting. Because unlike television, real justice didn't pause for ratings. By nightfall, the confrontation had overtaken every major news cycle. Cable panels were split-screening Jasmine Crockett's calm delivery against Judge Judy's escalating frustration. Some called it a generational clash, others a lesson in power dynamics gone wrong. One pundit on primetime news declared, this wasn't just a media moment, it was a cultural pivot. On social media, reactions poured in from celebrities, lawmakers, and legal analysts. Ava DuVernay tweeted, "Grace under fire." Crockett just gave a masterclass. Representative Maxwell Frost posted, "Proud to serve alongside a colleague who can disarm ego with truth." Ben Shapiro reacted, "Let's not pretend being rude to a TV judge is a qualification for leadership. It's not." Even The View devoted their entire opening segment to the clash, with Whoopi Goldberg saying, "I've never seen Judge Judy lose her grip like that," and Jasmine didn't even raise her voice. But while media outlets fanned the flames, Crockett remained off camera. She was back in D.C. by sunrise, blazer on, phone in hand, surrounded by folders, notes, and staffers. When one aide mentioned the coverage, Crockett raised an eyebrow and said, "That's yesterday. We've got appropriations to finish." Meanwhile, inside Judy's media empire, a storm was brewing. Executives were divided. Some wanted to spin the segment, others feared backlash. One exec paced her office, muttering, "We invited her to clash, and she crushed. We underestimated her, badly." In a rare private email that later leaked, Judy herself wrote just one sentence, "She played the long game. And I never saw it coming." The day after the explosive interview, a closed-door meeting was held at the network headquarters. Top producers, legal consultants, and media strategists sat around a long mahogany table beneath dim overhead lights. The mood was tense. "We need a statement," one executive insisted. "People are saying Judy ambushed a sitting congresswoman." Another chimed in, "No. If we lean into this right, it could be our biggest rating spike in years. Frame it as, tough justice meets tough leadership. Make it a cultural moment." But there was one problem, Judge Judy herself. She hadn't spoken to anyone since the taping. No texts. No calls. Not even her usual debrief with producers. Until now. The conference room doors opened, and Judy entered, carrying a single manila folder. She didn't sit. She simply laid the folder on the table and looked around. "Don't spin it," she said. Silence. We lost the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't grandstand. She stayed steady, and I didn't. That clip is going to outlive my entire catalog. A junior assistant cautiously asked, "So, what do we do?" Judy paused. Then answered, "We let it breathe." Meanwhile, in Capitol Hill, Jasmine Crockett received a discreet message from an unexpected sender, a retired federal judge. It read, "What you did yesterday, that wasn't just composure. That was control. Reminded me of when I started, before the robes turned into armor." Crockett stared at the message for a long moment. She didn't reply. Instead, she opened her laptop, clicked on a bill she was drafting, and kept typing. Let the world debate what happened. She had work to do. By now, the segment had been subtitled into over a dozen languages. Commentators from London to Lagos to Los Angeles were analyzing every facial expression, every pause, every word. One French outlet described it as un tempête glacial, a frozen storm. But while the media frenzy raged on, Capitol Hill was quietly shifting. Inside the halls of Congress, Jasmine Crockett found herself at the center of unexpected respect, not from her usual allies, but from those who had previously dismissed her as too fiery, too media-driven. Representative Byron Moore, a moderate from Pennsylvania, approached her during a committee recess. "I never liked the theatrics," he said, arms crossed. But that wasn't theatrics. That was strategy. Jasmine didn't look up from her notes. "Glad you noticed." Later that evening, she received a personal invitation to a bipartisan ethics roundtable, one that had never included her name before. But not everyone was impressed. A conservative columnist on national radio fumed, "This is what we've come to, applauding someone for disrespecting an American institution like Judge Judy?" To which a listener instantly called in and replied, "No. We're applauding someone for surviving it with dignity." As for Judy, she remained silent, but not absent. On her next broadcast, she opened the episode with an unusually subdued tone. "Justice," she said into the camera, "doesn't belong to one generation, one style, or one personality. Sometimes, it shows up looking different. That doesn't make it less powerful." She didn't say Jasmine's name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. 2 weeks after the broadcast, the dust had settled, but the impact remained. The clip of Jasmine Crockett calmly dismantling Judge Judy's authority had surpassed 40 million views. Universities were already citing the exchange in media ethics classes. A New York Times op-ed titled, "Grace Over Gavel," called it, "a defining moment in modern political communication." But Crockett? She stayed on mission. When a young law student asked her at a community forum how it felt to win against Judge Judy, she simply smiled and said, "It wasn't about winning. It was about showing that respect doesn't mean silence, and power doesn't mean volume." That line, too, went viral. Meanwhile, Judge Judy's team quietly made changes behind the scenes. Future segments were restructured. More balance. Less heat. A silent acknowledgement that the old formula had finally met its match. One late night, after wrapping a long day on Capitol Hill, Jasmine sat alone in her office. A staffer had left a small framed photo on her desk, a still shot from the interview, just as she delivered her most powerful line. At the bottom, in gold letters, it read, "Let the world debate. I'll keep working." She chuckled softly, shook her head, and slid it aside to make room for more policy drafts. Because Jasmine Crockett hadn't set out to go viral. She had set out to lead. And now the world finally knew the difference. Months later, the moment still echoed. Clips of the Crockett-Judy clash were dissected at leadership conferences and law school symposiums. Activists referenced it as a blueprint for poise under pressure. Young women, especially black women, called it, "the blueprint for when they come at you sideways." The Smithsonian requested archival rights to the footage, calling it, "a snapshot of generational power shift in American discourse." Back on Capitol Hill, Jasmine Crockett's reputation had evolved. No longer boxed in as just a progressive firebrand, she was now viewed as someone with strategic depth and unshakable discipline. She was invited to keynote the National Bar Association's annual gala. During her speech, she reflected, "People keep asking if that moment changed my career. It didn't. It revealed it. I've always stood firm. That day, the lights just happened to be on." As for Judge Judy, she didn't retreat from the spotlight. But she changed her tone. In a rare interview 6 months later, she addressed the now historic moment directly, "That woman didn't beat me. She didn't come to fight. She came to represent. And that's what shook me. Not her words, her discipline." She paused, then added with a smirk, "But don't expect me to go easy on the next one." And with that, the storm that once shook a studio became something greater, a standard. Not for volume. Not for ego. but for power, held in stillness. Nearly a year after the broadcast that shook both the media world and political landscape, the moment lived on, not as a viral clip, but as a symbol. High school debate teams played the exchange to teach composure under fire. Civil rights seminars quoted Crockett's final line to Judge Judy. Even late-night comedians, once eager to make jokes, had shifted their tone, now referring to the incident with a surprising level of respect. Jasmine Crockett herself had quietly risen in stature. She now chaired a key subcommittee, led by partisan efforts on ethics reform, and was frequently consulted behind closed doors, not just because she'd held her own on national TV, but because she'd shown she could hold the room. One day, while visiting a high school in Atlanta, a student asked, "What made you stay so calm when she was yelling?" Jasmine paused, then replied, "Because I wasn't talking to just her. I was talking to every person watching who's been silenced, dismissed, or underestimated. I wanted them to see that you don't have to shout to be heard." The auditorium erupted into applause. Not because she was famous, but because she was clear. And Judge Judy? She never publicly challenged Crockett again. In fact, her next book contained a single unexpected dedication on the opening page, "To those who keep their cool when the world turns up the heat. You made me listen." In the end, the clash wasn't about ego. It was about evolution. And when the final credits rolled on that moment in media history, it was Jasmine Crockett's name the world remembered.